Hey y'all, I'm Steve Schwarzer. We're fixing to go on a journey through my scrapbook. You're gonna love it. I'm the oldest continuously serving ABS Master Bladesmith. My certification ticket was signed by Bill Moran, the founder of it, in 1981. I'm on the books in 1983. And this is what I do for my life. My whole modern history has been put into making blades. And I wanted to give a little explanation about what it is I do. I create images and pictures in Mosaic Damascus steel. One of the pioneer of powder metal Damascus. I pioneered a lot of the modern techniques, and I've taught some of the major players worldwide. Some of the top bladesmiths in the world today are students of mine, and it's because of what they did with the knowledge. I just supplied it. When I started, there was a handful of people on the planet doing what I was doing that I knew about. I always add that as a caveat, because there's always some guy in the woods you don't know about. And I would say I was learning, and one of my biggest influence was Darryl Meyer of Carbondale, Illinois. He was doing a lot of cool stuff, and he was the only one who was really interested in hearing from me. And I wanted to explain a little bit about work and show a little bit about my work. Everybody says, well, what was your masterpiece? And I said, well, I was doing some patterns, and this is one of them. And it's a shooting scene. And I was doing a lot of complicated stuff, and Darryl Meyer was my instructor. And he said, well, why don't you do something real? And this is a little better shot of it. But I did a man and a dog and birds in a hunting scene. It's never been repeated. And it was the first time it had been done that I know of in modern history. And this is one of the knives, this is another knives. There was 4 of these knives completed, and they're the only ones in existence. I've spent my whole life studying this methodology. I started, everyone said, well, where did you get the skill sets? Well, you have to study. We all stood on backs of giants. Pattern welding's been around since the beginning of first ironwork. And there was one old guy had made a block iron, and it was all made by refining it with a hammer. And that's how they made it. They folded it, and it would create a pattern. But sooner or later in the line, a guy would have a little piece left over with a different alloy, and they'd put that in. And then a guy would see that and go, oh, that's a differential line in this pattern welded material. And then some art kid would look at it and go, boy, if I fold it like that, it'd make a snake or a critter or whatever. And that's kind of how I followed down the path. I wanted to do the stuff nobody else had done, and that's where I've gone with this. So I've done these pieces, and this is a kind of a set of pictures. These are all firsts and again, under that provision that I know of. Don Fogg had done a feather pattern in one side of a dagger, but this is the first folder it was ever done in. And I made that steel in conjunction with a young friend of mine named Rick Furrier. I always believe in giving credit where credit's due. If somebody helps you, doesn't make you a smaller smith, not to recognize them for their contribution to work. This chevron pattern was also developed from a piece of work I saw when I was teaching in Germany in '93. And these are all automatic folding knives. On the other side, these are all paneled Mosaic blades. When I did my first work, you had to figure out how to get the image from the end of the bar onto the piece, and I did it by layering panels on there, and it's a fairly common technique today, but nobody was doing it when these knives were made in the very, very early 80s. This is a pattern that I did, and it's got the word death written in it. A lot of people like dark things in their knives. I'm not particularly enamored with it, but I thought it'd be cool to do. And this was a series of knives I called the 4 Horsemen. And these faces are all made with plate and powder work. And that's why I teach, is this technique with the plate and powder came from a young man named Matt Deskin of Volcano Knives. And he came up with the plate idea. I was doing solids and powder, and then he came up with, well, I can stack a bunch of plates and achieve it, and it worked. So I immediately absorbed that idea, and I appreciate his contribution. On the back side, this is a straight pattern, what I call straight pattern. It's got straight lines in it, and that is very difficult to do. This is a virus pattern. This pattern is a 1-inch square tube with a high carbon steel rod in it that was reduced into this pattern, and so it goes on and on. This is particularly poignant with today's COVID. This is a virus pattern. It's real interesting. This is one of the most difficult patterns that I've ever done. This was nickel powder and BBs, and it was done in a canister that was computed by a friend of mine. So when you vibrated the canister, the BBs would stand in columns, and this is all nickel flour that was put in there, and that was forge welded or diffusion bonded into a solid chunk and cut on a 60-degree bias. There's 6 panels in this blade, and this is part of the stuff I'll be teaching in Jason's stuff. I work with several people on teaching, and I have classes. This is all very, very early Mosaic grid system with cutting edges. This is a recent, fairly recent, this has been done in the last few years, but I do all the carving. I try to explore everything new. I'm constantly learning. If I can't create or say something new, then I quickly lose interest. I'm like a kid with a flashlight. I rarely ever focus on anything. This was carved from Damascus in 1982. It's kind of interesting. There's another side. This is, I got interested in labyrinths and stuff that didn't have anything to do with layered. This is one of my powder techniques. This is what they call a parquet method, very common today, but it was unknown when I did this. And these labyrinths were unknown when I did them. That's another piece. This is a picture of a modern carving, and this is actually it. And this incorporates all my skill sets. Has the Damascus twisted pattern. It's all carved. These teeth are all inlaid, and it incorporates 3 rare earth magnets to hold it in position. It's kind of neat. And there's a good picture that was done by Eric Egley of that piece. This was a benchmark. This was the first Mosaic blade that I made in 1980, and it was sold to a company in Italy in that year, but it was the first panel blade I made, and it used the first Mosaic techniques that I developed. And then there's a whole pantheon of these other blades that I've done. These are, this is some of my modern work. Like I said, I'm always exploring new techniques, trying to be on the cutting edge. And everybody said, well, how'd you get the pattern in? I got it in with a laser, and that's new technology. There's nobody exploring it, especially old guys like me. But this is a laser technique with a bamboo root handle and a technique of cast pewter that was done in the 1800s. It was done in a lot of cutlery in 1800s. So I've got a mixture of the old and new. This is another one. This is a standard pocket knife. There's a Tony Bowes pattern that he gave me years ago, and I've adapted. It's got the same steel that your grandfather or your father would carry in his pocket, but I've adapted the modern laser techniques to carve these viper scales. I have titanium liners, and they're all firework and carved, and then scales on the back. A little anvil, that's kind of a trademark anvil nail nick, and the little viper scales on the back. So that's kind of where I'm going. This is a picture of me in my first shop, and that was about 1972 when I started forging, and I had hair and it was dark. This is another one of those pattern blades that was done in panels. Goblin folders. There's 2 more Goblin folders I did, and James A. Schmidt was the founder of that, and I adapted it. It's the most difficult knife that I make. So exploration and teaching is where it is for me. This is in my old shop. I don't know whether you can see that or not. I'll pull that out real quick. That's my old shop with a fire picture. That's me again. But anyway, I really enjoy what I do. I love it. I go to the shop every day happy with what I do. And this is just a portfolio of many years' work. This is a fire and ice piece I did early on. Nobody was doing that. Developed the techniques for getting the knives apart, started putting screws in them so I could get them and service them. I just try to stay on the cutting edge and teach these young smiths, you know, how it is you learn and you adapt from it. But there's another one of the Apocalypse knives. Another piece. This is one with a Harley motorcycle in it. That's Harley chain rolled up and welded. There's nothing you can't do once you know how. The secret is finding out how and developing the techniques to do that. Like I said, I've worked on a lot of the pattern development, how to get the pattern from the bar into the blade, how to develop the patterns, and I'm working on some optical illusions, and I'm always trying to be on the cutting edge of what I do. And I'm looking forward to seeing some of you. There's firework, more firework. So this was done for a friend in California. It's got white sharks in it. You're only limited by your imagination in this business. It's there's a set of those knives. I don't know whether you can see them or not, but that's with a dragon with a flame coming out of his mouth. It's part of that original feather pattern. That's a face pattern that was made out of stuff by forging techniques. A lot of the old ancient patterns were made by forging things to shape and putting them together. This is a close-up of that forged shape, and that was all made up out of files and a nickel sheet, round rods, forged all the teeth, and was made into that pattern. This is another one. I do a lot of carving, a lot of goblins. Everybody says, well, why all the fantasy? Because it's always correct. You know, if it's your idea, your fantasy, then it's correct. This is a knife I made for a young man that he didn't have, his family wasn't wealthy, but he wanted a knife made from a deer antler of one he harvested. And I made that for that young man, and he's become a success story. This is a little Viking folder. I like the Viking art, and it's a composition of all my skill sets: the forging of the Mosaic twisted bars, laser engraving, carving, a little bit of a fantasy piece. This is a result of a class that I took with Jason Knight, and it was my first integral. And I made that knife after coming to visit up here. And it was great fun. And I made a handle for it, and I didn't like it, so I took it off. And so fitting that handle on it after it was done was a big challenge. Early folders, another feather pattern early on. This was a hurricane pattern. It's basically a jelly roll forge welded over a center core. And more of the chevrons. Now, as far as I know, there's nobody else in the modern group that has repeated this pattern, especially in folders, because that's not an etch job. That's actually layered pattern weld, carbon steel, pattern weld, carbon steel, pattern weld, carbon steel. And it's pretty rare, and it's difficult to do if you don't know how. And that's, once you know how, it's easy. And that's where I go do big buoys. There's a whole array of different styles of knife. These are all collabs I did with people that carve, made fantastic blades, and they put fantastic handles. This one, particular one, was done with me and a fellow that taught me to carve. His name's Gary Van Osdale. He's a famous ivory carver. These are early daggers. This was carved in 1982 or 3, and it was all carved from bone. And it was that skill set. I should have stuck with it. I really enjoy carving. I'm getting back into it as I get older in age. I'm trying to find things that I can do in the shop that are not quite so physical, and carving's one of them. I just love it. This was a family blade I made for the Atenza family in New York. They're big collie specialists. These are forking knives sets that I did with little goblin faces. I love the whimsical stuff because that's a little window into my mind. This is a piece I did with a famous bladesmith named Virgil England, and he didn't do the work. I did the work, but I was learning to do the casting. I was interested in casting, so I found the best caster I could get to, and I learned from him. And same way, but these carvings are all mine. Little daggers, little poison daggers. These are done in one heat. They're letter openers with old style forging techniques. I made the dies, made the parts in my shop. This is a Goblin Axe. Has one of the goblins on the end. It's a multi-bar Mosaic head, twisted handle, and that was all made as a chunk. Here's another one. It's got a carved face on the end, gold inlays, all Mosaic. Same with this one, carved stylized eagle. Double-bitted axes. I've got, you know, if you do anything long enough, you can get pretty good at it. I wasn't any good at baskets, so I made knives. This is a piece I did with my wife. She wanted to see how to forge these particular Skagel replica axes, and her expertise is the Skagel handles, and we did that one together. This is a Viking Axe. These are my standard hunting knives. I make using knives for the average guy. I do karambits. I've got a martial arts history that dates back to 1962. I wasn't any good at it. My claim to fame is I've been beat up by some of the best people on the planet. That's the way it is. I make fishing knives, fillet knives. I've done some Japanese swords in collaboration with Wally Hostetter, and they're all traditional. If they didn't do it, we didn't do it. And I wrote for Blade magazine off and on for about 10 years. I've written in several hardback publications. One of them is Dr. Jerome's book on modern folding knives. I wrote the Mosaic chapter in that. I've been published in over 150 magazines and over 20 hardback books worldwide, and I got quite a following from it. But I'm just so grateful to be able to participate in this craft. It's been my life. It's how I met my wife, and just really enjoy teaching. At this stage of the game, that's where I'm going. If you have to teach, or if you want to teach, let me get the words right, it doubles your life in the business, because you physically do not have time to explore all the paths. So if you put that information, your information, into a student, then you get that back. And so it saves you from following every trail, and you get it. As you can see in my work, it was influenced by my students bringing information back to me, and I'm very appreciative of that. And that's basically who I am. I'm working on new projects like with the laser. I'm working some collabs with some very skilled people worldwide. Particularly one fellow in South Africa. He's an amazing young man. I met him 2 years ago. I flew to South Africa to watch his technique because he's so skilled, named Henning Wilkerson, and just amazing young guy. And we're repeating another project that you'll see soon, and that's where I'm going. There's an early blade with first attempt at lettering. I'm trying to find some early documented stuff for you here. This was stuff I won. This was my signature. I did that. That was the first time in modern history, or any history, where an actual signature was done in a bar. I developed a technique for that using powder metal. I need to get rolling. I cut a silk scarf thrown in the air at the Kansas City show when we were researching the woots. And we're just up and cooking. I run out of words. Well, I'm Steve Schwarzer, and thank you for listening to me and participating in my life story. It's very important, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen. See ya.